G'day, ZiggyD here.
Today I'm here with a special guest, the Holy Hermit, a YouTuber who specializes in doing a bunch of very unique and interesting build guide videos for Diablo 3, in amongst some other interesting content. And since he does a lot of unique guides, we're going to be talking today about the class structure in Reaper of Souls, how things are now today in current Diablo 3 vanilla, and how things will be changing in the expansion pack, and what it means for players and how they can play their classes. So, how are you going, Holy Hermit?
Hello, Mr. ZiggyD. Thank you for having me here, my friend. I'm doing very well, thank you, and it's an absolute pleasure to be on your channel. So for you guys who don't know me, I am Holy Hermit, and I make a few funny videos every now and then. I do focus on making build videos in Diablo rather than the auction house side of things. That's basically me, really.
They're very, very entertaining, and I highly recommend checking them out. They're very different. He likes to make a lot of different builds, so perfect sort of discussion topic for us today. So I'm going to hand off to Holy Hermit, who's going to talk a little bit about the history of Diablo 3 in terms of class structure and where we are at the moment. So go ahead with that.
So the way we're going to talk about in this video is going to be something different. Normally it's all about the itemization, what's the new character coming in. Here we're going to look into the different side of things. We've all been talking about Reaper of Souls, new character, loot 2.0. Here we're going to talk about something unique, but it's also a very big part of Reaper of Souls. In my humble opinion, it'll probably be the biggest part of Reaper of Souls. But to give you a little perspective of where we are, we're just going to quickly talk about the history of Diablo 3. So a few years ago, or a year and a half ago to be slightly more precise, Diablo 3 did come out, and we all were very excited about the game. We'd seen what Diablo 2 did to the gaming community, and Diablo 3 came with a bang. But we did have a few problems. The character looked amazing, the gameplay was smooth, health system was pretty refined, but as time went by, people were struggling to gear up their characters. There were initial hiccups, but then auction house kind of took over everything, and people relied on getting geared up by using only the auction house. So time went on, a few patches did come by, some got nerfed, some characters did get buffed, but in the end, the whole gameplay did revolve around the auction house. Now we've been announced a few things about Reaper of Souls. We're getting new content, character, new endgame, and even a quest. But the most exciting feature about Reaper of Souls, in my humble opinion, are the skill changes and the itemization thing. But before we delve off into that, I do have a question for you, Ziggy. We have a new character, Crusader. What do you think about that?
The Crusader, I am very excited for. Mainly because it's a class that actually makes uses of shields. And shields are something that, they tend to not get much love in action RPGs. Like in vanilla, we used them for a while when the content was difficult, and then moved away from them as soon as possible. And I think that's a problem because they're seen as something that's mostly defensive. But in actual history, from my study of various forms of combat and things like that, the shield has actually been something that's been used for great offensive power throughout history.
Absolutely.
And the Crusader seems to make good use of that, using the shield offensively as a main part of his arsenal, and I'm very excited for that. But also, just in terms of the itemization changes and skill changes coming to existing classes and the Crusader, it seems like we're going to have a lot more variance in the builds we can play, and the playstyles as well. Sounds like we're going to be getting some big changes in terms of playstyle. So why don't you go ahead and introduce the Character 2.0, as you've named it here.
Oh, that's how we're lovingly calling it today, really. Character 2.0. So everyone talks about the loot 2.0 and the new stuff. To me, particularly, what's most interesting is how the characters are being completely reworked. Now, back in the days, or as I would say right now, we're playing the game as it is. We have our barbarian running Rat the Berserker. We have our amazing wizards with flashy skills, but all we use is Archon. So you do see currently right now, the game is amazing and it's fun. And if you talk about efficiency, it's all going well. But after all, it is a game, is it not? So the whole idea for video game is to have a bit of fun and still enjoy the whole process. So that's where I think the current flaws in the system are. So what exactly is Character 2.0 really then? The idea for this system, as according to Blizzard, is to rework and revamp all the skills that are not being used by a current class. If you're a barbarian, you're probably never even using No Pain. Some people use skills like Leap, but nah, not so much. You'll always focus on certain specific skills. So this Character 2.0 has certain specific things related to it. It's basically a three-pronged idea really. A three-point approach by Blizzard in which they're going to tackle this whole system in an amazing way. So what I understand, in my humble opinion, would be they're trying to do this thing in first and foremost way by adding new skills to the character classes. You're also getting Crusader, that's all well and good, but the current classes are also getting a lot of love. Since the level cap will be 70 this time, from 60 to 70 as you move forward, you will get new skills being added to your character. So that means that the current skills you're using right now will be in complete sync with the new skills, but also the skills that you're not using at the moment are also going to be improved. Something like Sleet Storm, right now there are a few builds out there for a wizard, but it's not that effective, so certain skills like that are getting reworked. So the final feature in Character 2.0 is by adding new legendaries to the game. There will be certain items that will benefit your current skills that you're using on your character. For instance, if you have an Arcane Hydra for a wizard, if you use a certain wand, it'll allow you to summon 2 Hydras, thereby increasing your damage. Versatility is what Blizzard is aiming for here. Rather than playing with one specific narrow-minded build, you will have an opportunity to play with multiple builds. All of this is at your disposal. All you have to do is get decent gear by farming as you do right now. An opportunity will come to you when one set of items will open one specific build for you. What do you think about this, Ziggy?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting points there with how the game's going to change. I want to run with the idea of Ignore Pain, for example, because I think it's a really good one that highlights a current problem with the game and how things will change. Currently, Ignore Pain, you know, it allows you to reduce incoming damage, but with the current health system, the way healing and everything works in the game, it's only really relevant if you're getting one shot. So, in the future, with the changes to some of the changes coming to itemization skills and healing and things like that, things like Ignore Pain might actually become a useful point in builds because they'll actually have a big impact on the actual gameplay. The ability to reduce a good amount of damage over time, the overall amount of damage you're taking, means you're going to have much better sustain and be able to keep going for a long time. And not just about avoiding those one-shots. So that's a really important one, I think. But in terms of changing, obviously rebalancing skills that are being lesser used at the moment, means that we're going to have a bit more diversity in what we can actually play around with. They did go some way towards correcting this in a patch a while back. I think it was like 107 or something that had a bunch of skill changes in it, and that helped things a bit. We started to use a few other skills that actually brought out when we had, like, you know, I remember with the Demon Hunter specifically, we had pretty much one build that everyone was running. It was pretty much just Lightning Ball. But after a few skill changes there, people started playing around with multi-shot. I started Cinder Strafing, and lots of other builds started coming out of it. And then we ended up using things like Rapid Fire and things like that we use now. So we did have that increase in diversity, and that sort of thing is coming again in Reaper of Souls, and along with a bunch of other changes, that's going to make a big difference. And then on top of that, the whole Legendaries changes, bringing a lot of actual legendary affixes that change the way your builds function, means that you can actually, the way you gear your character is much more important than just getting the best stats. It's going to be about getting the right items to enable certain builds. So sure, things like, you know, Whirlwind Barb and things like that might be removed from the game, or Archon might be removed from the game. Certain items will allow you to do that again if you do enjoy that playstyle. And I think that's a pretty significant point. I think a lot of people are worried about the fact that they really like playing Whirlwind Barb or Archon and that they're going to be losing that. But those people that still want to do that will be able to do that. It just won't be enabled by default on your character. It won't be, might not be the most optimal way to play in general for everything, but you'll still be able to get in and do that gameplay. And that's a part of build diversity, is still being able to do these builds in addition to a bunch of other builds, not just making it a clear-cut choice of Whirlwind Barb is the most efficient build for MP10 Paragon XP farming. So hopefully, I'm pretty optimistic about what sort of changes is going to happen. So why don't we talk a little bit more about the itemization changes then?
Certainly. See, right now, the way the game works, all you need is a good set of gear. If you've got certain set of items on your Barbarian, let's just say mainly stacked on strength, critical hit chance, attack speed, and damage, you will do good. You don't have to rely on anything else. Legendaries, what you put on right now, they're not going to affect you that much. A rare item is just as good as legendary one, and in some cases, it's even better. And this leads to one of the biggest problems in the game, you being stuck with one particular build. As Ziggy just kindly pointed out there, playing as Rat of the Berserker Barbarian is one of the most effective ways right now, but later on it won't be. That does not mean that it's going to be utterly useless. There will be other competitive ways to play as the character. So where this thing boils down into is you would need good understanding of your build along with certain legendaries to take you in a certain specific way, and that is the best feature in my opinion for Reaper of Souls. Every person will have his own character. The way you will build your character will be something unique to your own self. Whatever skills you put into it, by using the Paragon system, which we'll later on talk about, but anything you put into your character will make the character unique to yourself. A legendary will be game changing. Right now we're talking about Rat of the Berserker, but there are other skills like Call of the Ancients that are never being used right now. So what if there are legendary items that you use that allow you to sustain that form indefinitely? Rat of the Berserker does sound good, but imagine your friend Talik and Cormac summoned at your side doing about 50 to 100% weapon damage, and they would not die until someone kills them, that is, but they will be fighting alongside your side, taking your effective damage to very high amounts. So even though you're not sustaining one kind of build, it's opening possibilities. And again, really, as I say, sky is the limit for this kind of things, because so many legendaries with so many new itemization changes would basically make your character very personal. It'll be something you would like to create, and you can proudly say that yes, this is my build and I created with using my own gear that I found by farming the game, and by finding these special legendaries that added a little bit bonus to my build. So that to me is an amazing feature. What do you think about that, Ziggy? Isn't that something great?
Yeah, I have to say, it's going to be, going into Reaper of Souls, it's going to be an exciting time for YouTubers like ourselves. It's going to be a bit of a golden era for new sorts of build guides, because now we currently focus on, if we're going to make a build guide, we're just focusing on what's the most efficient build, and most people already know these builds, like, there's 10,000 people who've already made guides on the same build. Yeah. But with like actual legendaries that we can create builds around, we're going to be able to like do a new build, all the time. Say we find a cool new legendary, then instead of talking about what's a build we can create and then items that we can put in that build, we can be like, okay, what sort of builds can we make around this interesting legendary? And there's going to be a ton of exciting builds we can make out of that, and that's going to make for some pretty exciting YouTube content, I think. I know that's something that should be pretty exciting for
That's
your
more
channel,
of a personal thing, guys. Sorry, us two really like to make these builds, as you know, so to us it's like Christmas come early, really, and it's going to be Christmas all year round during Reaper of Souls, so yeah, I'm very excited to see how that turns out. And
it might be a bit early to speculate on that sort of thing. Like, sure, we could be a bit cynical and say chances are there's still going to be optimal builds. But the fact that we're already seeing these legendary items that have been tested and with their actual unique affixes, and in combination with some of the other things like caps on crit chance and all that jazz, there is a good chance that we're still going to be able to make these builds, even if there is still a few optimal builds. There's just still going to be a lot more variety than there is in the game at the moment, just because of the way the mechanics are changing. So that's pretty exciting. But there's kind of another thing that feeds into this, Paragon skill allocation, and how that's going to affect gameplay. So why don't you rattle that off for us?
Absolutely, that's another dark horse in the game, really. So people right now are looking at this Paragon skills, and they have explained it to a certain extent, where you have your main stats, that's all well and good, and by that I mean strength, dexterity, or your intelligence. Vitality is also there, but you also see the fancy shiny numbers there. You see something like crit chance, crit damage, and attack speed. We all love that right now, but Blizzard did make a certain point of saying that you will have a cap on these. Now your first point of view when you listen to this news is, that's going to be horrible. If my crit chance is low, my DPS won't be that high and it's not going to be that good for me. But I'll tell you something different. What I have personally seen so far in this Paragon skill allocation system, you have certain abilities there that can reduce cooldown of your skills. Rather than having offensive nature in your character by adding just crit chance and damage, which you can, by the way, if you want to, there are other things which reduce cooldown to your skills. To me, this is something specific, and I'll ask you a question on this little note. Would you rather prefer to hit monster every now and then and see those yellow numbers popping up, or would you rather be able to use your skills every now and then? Would you rather prefer A, to just keep hitting and attacking your opponent with Fist of Thunder, or would you like to spam those Wave of Light, or even Breath of Heaven to try something unique? This is what Blizzard is going for. They're going for not just having fancy numbers on the screen, they're going for fast action gameplay. Diablo is a dungeon crawler, and part of it depends on loot. Yes, you're going after loot, but there's always a risk and reward system. And the way they're tackling this is very special to me. They're putting a cap on your main offensive stats for a fact that you can only get certain amount from your gear. So Paragon leveling will fill that void very well. It's going to give you a chance to either A, you can take these numbers even higher if you wish to do so, or B, put something extra in your character, making something unique. Adding certain things like cooldown reduction to your character, you'll be able to spam a skill a little bit more. You'll always be in the heat of battle, you'll always be doing something. Monsters around you will be taking damage, and you will be interacting with them, and that will make a lot more personal and fun experience. What do you think of that, Ziggy? Is that something cool? Do you like this idea?
Yeah, that's it. I think this idea of having hard caps on the highly desirable stats on your gear, and then allowing Paragons, with the Paragon system, to allow you to make some choices then how you go about, exceeding those caps. Let's think of it like this. We have caps coming for crit chance, crit damage, attack speed, but there's also still caps on cooldown. Like cooldowns by their very nature have a cap. They're capped at the amount that the cooldown is by default.
Absolutely.
That's the cap. So all these things are still capped. It's a bit of an interesting, different way to think about it. So then the Paragon system then allows you to choose how and where you want to exceed those caps. Sure, you can just go for the highly desirable crit chance, crit damage, or attack speed, but you also have the choice of which one is most useful for the builds you want to create. What's the specific ones you want to create? And this is going to be something you can respec, sure. I don't know what the sort of costs will be associated with that, but they have said it's something you can play around with. But basically, maybe it's going to be much more important for you to focus your Paragon points on customizing your character into attack speed and cooldown reduction, so you can build up a lot of spirit or something like that, and then use that, spam that a lot better with the cooldown skills and things like that. So it's going to open up a lot more build variety. And the Paragon system, it just seems much more involved and much more interesting. It is actually a customization system, which is something that the game just completely lacks at the moment. There's no customization system really. There's just a select and check off the skills you want at the moment. But this is actually going to let you customize those hard stats, and that's what gets really exciting for the really hardcore players, especially because that means they can actually think about and theory craft their builds a bit more and actually pick those rather than just picking the default best out pieces of gear on that. So that's pretty exciting. But that kind of moves us into the next point, because we've talked about, how skills and gear and Paragon systems are going to be changing the way we play, but that's only half of the equation. One of the things that really affects builds is kind of this idea of, natural selection, essentially. The builds that end up working well in the current game mode are like that. We use those builds because they work well in the current gameplay, the current meta game, currently, which is to farm Paragon levels and that sort of thing. So, yes. High monster power, trash mobs, that sort of thing. But with Reaper of Souls, we're getting new game modes. So why don't you run us through that, Holy Hermit?
So we've got quite a few new things coming, really, and that is all amazing. So the way Blizzard approaches the end game content is they talk about freedom. If you've got 5 minutes to play, why not run into an act and do the good old farming? But what if you're on a weekend, if you've got half an hour or maybe an hour to spend with your mates? Why not to do certain specific quests that will give you something extra in return? So they're offering us loot runs, Nephilim trials and devil hands, among many other hidden secrets they're still keeping from us. All these are specific tasks that players are allowed to accomplish on his own or with a party of 4. And all these things relate to builds again.
I think the really key point with that is then that, these things like Loot Run, Nephilim Trials, and Devil's Hand, like they're different game modes, but sure they could be the same thing, but Blizzard has given us details basically that these are going to function differently. Like in Nephilim Trials, for example, there's going to be specific challenges, like you have to kill off certain enemies or you have to do certain things, play in certain ways to be able to do well in them. It's not just the simple fact of killing as many enemies as fast as possible. Obviously, that's always going to be a bit of the point in action RPGs, but having specific goals means that builds are going to have to be tailored towards reaching those goals if you want to do the best possible. And I'm hoping that this is difficult to achieve these goals, so you actually you're forced to create builds that work well in these situations, which that sort of thing is going to, as I said, natural selection. It's going to create these builds of necessity where we have to create certain sort of builds and different sort of builds to be able to deal with these different situations. It's not going to be a one size fits all sort of situation. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, dealing damage will not be the only way to finish these trials, and that's exactly what Blizzard wants from the whole quest system, really. You might be required to survive a certain quest, and for that you need builds. You need to understand your character. Fair enough, you can get a certain amount of gear, but when it comes to these quests, when you're playing in a party and everything depends on you, bear in mind that's exactly what action RPGs are all about. Cooperation and having fun. And when you're in that situation, the person with more knowledge of their build, who understands the character very well, will come on top, really. And these game modes will be the prime example of this kind of gameplay, really. So, even the way you're going to deal with monsters. Right now, if I'll give you an example, if you're playing in Act 1, you're going to run a certain build. If you're playing as a wizard, if you've got CM wizard, you're going to spec your character in a certain way. Act 1, you don't need that teleport on you. You can slowly move around. But when you go to Act 2, you see different monsters. Act 3, you see those lunatics running after you. You have to adapt. But the way the game is right now, not a lot is needed, really, right? Because all you need is just DPS and you can plow through everything. But when the new game comes, new skills become open, you can do things in a lot faster way. All the skills are going to be buffed in one way or other. So all these trials will require something different from you. Imagine those charging beasts from Act 1 with lunatics, and let's just say Armadon from Act 4. You put them all together, try Rattle the Berserk between them, it's not going to work. Try maybe a Bell Burst, it's probably not going to work, because you'll be stunned all the time. What are you going to do then? Try something different, right? And that's exactly where the game will shine again. Your knowledge, your involvement with the build of the character, leading you to a place where you just absolutely outshine and outmaneuver everything. And I'll ask you a question. Remember the first Diablo kill you made? That was something special. Maybe remember the first Uber kill you did? That was again something special. But time went by, that got boring. But all of this is coming back in these new game modes, and that's what's going to be exciting for players. I think that's
that's an
something...
interesting point, actually, about when these things first come in. They're an interesting thing, and it kind of raises, I guess, the counter argument then that will these same things become boring after a while. But my counter argument to that counter argument is that with Reaper of Souls, we're getting so much of this new stuff, and if it's balanced right, so we are hoping a little bit here, if it's balanced right, then maybe it gives us a year of content to play with. And so it gets a bit boring after a year. We're dominating content. We go back to just using easy builds that dominate everything. But that's a year later. In a year's time, there'll be another expansion pack.
Absolutely,
I
really
can't ask
on
much
that.
more for a game than that to last until the next game comes out. You know, if Call of Duty keeps you occupied until the next Call of Duty comes out, then it's done its job. And you know, if we see Diablo 3 go a similar way, I hate to relate those two games together, but you know, if Reaper of Souls, if the new content keeps us really engaged for the next year, then I'm pretty excited by that prospect. It's more than I can possibly ask of any game.
The way they're tackling this whole thing right now is they want to give you a content that you can rely on for a longer amount of time. It's not just going to be a week-long content where you play the game, beat Malthair for instance, and we don't even know who the final boss is. Well, we do kind of, but we're not going to spoil it for you. But you do fight Malthair, and that's it. You're bored with the game. You found a few legendaries? No. Again, Auction House is being removed, so the progress you're going to make will be very steady, and it's going to be at a good pace. You can trade with your friends, that's an amazing thing. But Auction House gone, you'll farm for an hour, and the way the developers are explaining the game for us, you will find legendaries along the way. They're all going to be useful in one way or other, so you can keep them for your one build or for another character. But slowly and steadily, you will build up your character. But as you see right now in the current auction house, people can just go buy an item, but in Reaper of Souls that won't happen, and that's going to straight away increase the duration of the game, the longevity if I should say. As time will go by, you'll slowly level up your character, and then you'll slowly try out new builds. With each new legendary, the shiny thing that drops on the floor, you will pick it up and you'll read that fancier fix. That leads you to making something new, and that I'm very sure will increase the age of the game by at least a year. And as Ziggy said earlier, maybe we're going to get another expansion. Ever wondered, guys, why in Diablo do we have level 60? Now it's level 70, right? That's still a weird number. It's not really a round number to a certain extent. 70 is a good number, but what about 100, guys? I mean, that's a nice and easy number to say. Blizzard wants Diablo to last forever. It's one of those games that's still being played right now, and people like you and me do enjoy it. Diablo 2 also, on the side note, is also being played to this very day by people like us since the beginning of Diablo 2, right? So they would like Diablo 3 to even outperform 2, and the way they do it is to release new content, and in the meantime also keeps player engaged with the current content. And I think Reaper of Soul is a great start.
Yeah, it's pretty damn exciting. I try to keep my hype in check for it, but the amount of content we're getting in addition to removal of Auction House just means that the longevity is really going to be there, and I'm pretty excited for it. I can't really keep my hype in check too much. So it's been a pleasure talking to you, Holy Hermit. I highly recommend everyone go check out his channel. I'm sure I'll put multiple links to his various build guides and things like that throughout this video. Go check them out. They're pretty unique and fun. If you're a bit bored with gameplay, playing the same old wizard builds and that sort of thing over and over again at the moment, then I've seen some pretty interesting and alternative themed builds on Holy Hermit's channel. So definitely go check those out. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Ziggy, for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and to you guys listening. Have a nice evening and day, wherever you are in the world right now. But do take care of yourself, and goodbye from us too.
Cheers.